OpenAI filed confidentially for an IPO that could value it at up to $850 billion. That is the new fact of today. OpenAI submitted a confidential S-1 to the SEC. An S-1 is the investor prospectus that a company files before going public. Confidential means that regulators get to see it first and the public sees it later. OpenAI announced the filing itself. The company reportedly expected the news to leak anyway. 1 week earlier, Anthropic had also announced its own confidential filing. So both leading frontier labs have now put themselves on the path toward public market disclosure. That outweighs the Wall Street spectacle. Now, the usual coverage will treat this like a race. Which lab gets the bigger valuation? Which IPO ranks higher in market history? Which investors get access first? But the stronger signal here is disclosure. A confidential S-1 opens revenue, margins, liabilities, and risk factors to regulators first, and then it opens them to the public. That changes the room. For years, the economic of frontier AI lived inside these private term sheets. Investors are accepting the projections. Labs talked about scale, and the world saw the capability growth and just assumed that the business model would kind of eventually catch up. But now the books have to start talking. OpenAI reached this expected valuation at about $850 billion while showing difficulty turning a profit. It also missed key revenue and user targets on the way here. Now, the company, of course, is still huge. We know that. The filing is just really unusually revealing. The company is trying to go public while the business under ChatGPT is changing shape. In yesterday's episode, we went deep on the ChatGPT overhaul, so I won't rerun that whole story, but the short version is this. OpenAI is recasting ChatGPT into what executives describe as a super app. That means more coding tools, more AI agents, and more business workflows, but all inside one interface. A senior OpenAI employee told the Financial Times that chat is dead. So treat that as just one employee's framing, but it's also a pretty clear window into the pressure that they're facing right now. ChatGPT has been used by nearly 1 billion people, but the free majority of users generates very little revenue. So the money target is enterprise instead, coding systems, agents, and per token contracts, business customers who pay for better work. That is why Codex is getting more prominence and more resources. And it's also why OpenAI is competing harder with Anthropic. Anthropic edged past OpenAI in enterprise adoption last month, 34.4% to 32.3%, according to RAMP spending data. So the S1 arrives at what is a really tense moment for them. OpenAI is asking the public markets to value the company like a durable center of the AI economy, while at the same time, enterprises are already routing routine work to cheaper models that mostly answer well enough. So the books that carried the AI boom are about to leave the private room. That is the line that I'd carry from this one. The wonder of the capability remains huge. The institutional story is harder. A lab can describe an IPO as ambition. It can describe a super app as a vision. It can describe scale as inevitability. The filing will show what those words cost. And once both frontier labs enter the public market path, the era of trust us, the margins will arrive later, really starts to narrow. All right, next, the build-out moves from finance to the places carrying the physical cost. Seattle's council is weighing a 1-year data center moratorium. The vote is today, actually, June 9th. The proposal covers 5 facilities from 4 different companies. Together, those facilities would draw 369 megawatts. That's roughly a third of the entire city of Seattle's daily electricity use. It is also 10 times the city's existing data center load. So this is city-scale power demand. Now, the testimony that's happening is also important. Current Amazon engineers testified in favor of restrictions. They are members of Amazon Employees for Climate Justice. Their asks were very clear: 100% additional local renewable supply, public water and electricity reporting, and an end to NDAs and shell companies that hide who owns the site. That last one is plain but powerful. A town cannot negotiate honestly with a building whose owner is hidden. And Seattle is only one piece of the cost ledger opening. A Guardian analysis looked at 809 planned data centers in the United States. It found that 517 of those planned facilities are sited in places that have spent the last year in drought. More than 60% of the contiguous United States sits in some stage of dry condition. The Guardian described that as the largest spring expanse in modern records. Developers are drawn to arid, sparsely populated counties for familiar reasons. They're cheap land. There are tax breaks usually, lower equipment corrosion. But the water math is unfortunately moving in the other direction. Total data center water demand is projected to climb from about 17 billion gallons in 2023 to as much as 73 billion by 2028. That is the drought map. Now, add the gas map. Energy innovation analysts documented roughly 100 gigawatts of planned on-site gas generation for data centers. That is equal to 18% of all existing U.S. gas capacity. On-site gas sounds like a way to maybe spare the grid, but the mechanism does not work that cleanly. A data center that burns bulk contracted gas still competes in the commodity market that helps set electricity prices in most hours. And when the data center signs with a gas supplier instead of a utility, its rates sit outside any regulator's reach. So the facilities can avoid the utility ledger while still raising everyone's bills through the fuel market. That moves the cost somewhere much harder to see. Now, the constructive part. FERC, F-E-R-C, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, approved the Southwest Power Pool's CHILLS framework. CHILLS is a non-firm transmission service for large load. Non-firm means the customer accepts interruption during grid emergencies. So a data center gets connected faster in exchange for that. So that means that it can be curtailed when the system is constrained. That flips an old arrangement. Residents have often absorbed reliability risk through higher bills or grid stress. What CHILLS does is it puts some of that risk onto the large load asking to connect. So a data center that wants the power would now have to show the water, the owner, and the bill. That is what to take from this. So AI infrastructure will be built because the capability is too useful to leave just on paper, but the fight is now over the terms. Seattle's engineers are asking for transparent ownership and public resource reporting. The Guardian drought analysis names the water exposure. Energy innovation names the bill mechanism. And FERC just approved a tariff that makes data centers accept curtailment. Each move makes the build-out more legible. The hard year right now is the one where the hidden costs stop being hidden. And a deeper look at this is in today's edition. Okay, moving on here. The sovereignty story we cover has a more optimistic edge as well. The UK laid out a $1.47 billion plan to reduce dependence on foreign-made AI hardware. The center of it is a national AI supercomputer. More than $1 billion goes to that machine. Another $530 million goes into hardware, and $200 million is carved out specifically for homegrown inference chips. Inference chips run AI models after training. They are the hardware that answers the question, serves the assistant, or eventually runs the agent. They are cheaper and they're more specialized than training GPUs, and that makes them a realistic entry point for startups, for example. The UK plan gives procurement priority to British startups such as Olix and Fractile, and that is not just a grant. A state buying plan gives a startup a committed customer. It gives investors a demand signal. It tells the company there is a reason to scale locally instead of selling itself into someone else's stack. Researchers are expected to access the machines starting in 2030. The government's stated rationale came through Technology Secretary Liz Kendall. She said, quote, AI sovereignty is about reducing overdependencies and increasing resilience. So that is the official frame, but state sovereignty language always deserves a careful read. Governments can use that word to justify control just as easily as they do resilience. I'm not saying that's what they're doing. I'm saying that is a possibility, so it always deserves a close look. But the evidence underneath this one is quite real. A country now has domestic inference chip startups credible enough to put inside a national procurement plan. That would have sounded much thinner just a short time ago. Now pair that with Europe's own open source move. The EU formalized an open source strategy that puts open alternatives at the center of European technological sovereignty. The strategy reaches across operating systems, cloud, AI, cybersecurity, and semiconductors. The EU document says open source creates economic value that is often captured outside Europe. It also says dependence on dominant non-EU providers limits control over critical digital infrastructure. The remedy is procurement guidance favoring open bids. It also includes open source maintenance instruments. Funding is prioritized in the same critical technology areas the UK is buying for. Open weight models are the other half of this. An open weight model is a model whose parameters are publicly downloadable. People can run it, inspect it, build on it without a Frontier Labs permission. Now, the numbers show this boundary really clearly. On June 3rd, we covered this. NVIDIA's Nematron 3 Ultra scored 48 on artificial analysis. China's Open Kimi K2.6 scored 54. Those are very strong open models. They still do trail the closed frontier leader. The claim stops short of parity with the best closed systems. It is that the open models are now strong enough to anchor a national strategy. Owning part of the AI stack is becoming realistic for countries that used to rent the whole thing. That is the big shift. The UK is trying to own more of the silicon layer. The EU is trying to make open software and open models part of the default public stack. Those moves only make sense because capability has already diffused. A choke point is still a choke point while no one can build around it. Once governments can choose domestic inference chips and open models, the dependency starts to look less like fate and more like a design choice that we can actually make. Now over to biology, and I want to be really careful with how talking about this is going to come across. David Sinclair confirmed to MIT Technology Review that he plans to give volunteers an oral drug mixture, code-named SL100. His stated goal is to, quote, find evidence for age restoration in humans. Now that is a big claim, and it's also just a proposed trial. It has not even begun yet. And the formula remains, in Sinclair's words, highly, highly confidential. So the discipline is got to come first here. This is not age reversal now available. This is an attempt to test for a signal in people. Now the reason it belongs here is the measurement frame. Sinclair's plan sits inside the $101 million X Prize Health Span competition. The grand prize goes to any team that shows a 10-year or greater relative improvement in immune, cognitive, and muscle function after a single year of treatment. That is measured against a person's apparent age. Now, health span means years of healthy life. It is different from total lifespan. The prize is trying to turn the rejuvenation into something that judges can score, and that is genuinely new. The underlying science is about 20 years old or so. Researchers discovered that a handful of genes can turn an adult cell back into an embryo-like stem cell. That reframed aging as partly tied to epigenetic marks on DNA. Epigenetic marks tells a cell which genes to express, but they do not change the DNA sequence itself. So think of it as a musical score with sticky notes all over it. The notes are still there. The cell is reading some lines louder and others softer than they were originally intended. But reprogramming tries to remove those sticky notes and get back to the original. Sinclair's Life Biosciences has also announced treatment of its first patient in a gene therapy trial limited to the eye. New Limit, founded by Brian Armstrong, just raised another $435 million toward reprogramming the liver. Sinclair's proposed route here is broader, a swallowed compound that would travel through the bloodstream and reach cells across the body. That is the ambition, but the risk, of course, is also bigger. Independent caution belongs here. I want to say that up front. Sergey Velichko, founder of Soxygen, said that lab chemical reprogramming can be extremely harsh. And he also noted that it runs at very high concentrations. The X Prize judges also say that reaching even a single winner will be incredibly hard. And that caution is central to this story. Age reversal is moving from a promise that people sell, and often as erroneously as snake oil, to a result that judges can actually score. That alone is mind-blowing. The fact that we have the ability to even entertain such a notion was sci-fi just 3 years ago. Let that sink in. The timeline compression is staggering here. Now just imagine outward from here, the questions we will be asking and more importantly answering just 3 years from now. Continuing with the story, the competition is narrowing 65 teams to 10 finalists, and all finalists are required to move into human trials this year. A field long shaped by promise is being pushed toward functional endpoints: immune function, cognition, muscle function, not vibes, not youth branding, measurements. Now, the outcome is still a long shot. The attempt is just more honest now. And in medicine, honest measurement is often the bridge between a beautiful animal result and a treatment that can survive contact with human patients. Okay, shifting over to devices. Two Nature Materials papers show the soft body of future machines taking shape. One paper is about seeing, and the other is about displaying. Together, they give you the input side and the output side of soft electronics. The first paper describes a stretchable imager. The team integrated single crystalline silicon pixels with finely patterned liquid metal interconnects, and those sit on an ultra-thin elastic substrate. The results can stretch 100% biaxially. Biaxial means two directions at once. 100% means it can double in size. Now, the key number is 81% fill factor. Fill factor is the share of a sensor surface that actually captures the light. Older stretchable sensor arrays gained flexibility by giving up light capture. This device keeps much more of both. The team built a human eye-inspired vision system with a tunable focus, and they also built a separate skin-mountable lens-free imager. Then they ran the two together for multi-scale acquisition and depth sensing. Now, it all sounds very technical, but here's the everyday translation. One sensor looks more like an eye, and another sits more like skin, but together they help the machine understand a scene visually at different ranges. That is how living bodies like ours perceive the world. Eyes and touch cooperate. All right, the second paper here moves to display. Conventional organic light-emitting transistors have needed punishing voltages in the past. In field effect form, they have required more than 80 volts. They also emit from a thin line that tends to drift. This new device is a single active layer electrochemical organic light emitting transistor. It operates below 3.5 volts, and it pins a wide emission zone, roughly 267 micrometers across. It reaches 826 candelas per square meter. That brightness is roughly enough to read in normal indoor light, and it does this while running on two 1.5 volt batteries. Basically, that's two AA batteries. The mechanism is an ion transport enhancer in light-emitting polymer. It forms a charge layer at the drain electrode, and that gets electrons in without the usual doping tricks that have to happen. So the result is a flexible, large area emitter that a coin cell can drive. Machines are, in other words, starting to bend toward bodies instead of forcing bodies around the machines. That is the line from both of these papers. Both advances are still single lab demonstrations. A published device still has to become a manufactured one to actually be usable. Reliability, yield, packaging, and cost still have to cross the valley. But the constraint has definitely moved here. Machine vision has long wanted flat, rigid sensors. Displays have long wanted rigid boards and higher power. These papers point toward another shape. A robotic surface can stretch and still see. A wearable surface can bend and still glow. The references in both papers reach into the same lineage. Artificial nerves, neuromorphic e-skin, bio-integrated sensors. That is why these two papers belong together. Robots and wearables are borrowing from organic function on both sides. They are learning to sense like bodies. They are learning to signal through surfaces that sit closer to skin. So forget the humanoid machine with a face. The more interesting path runs everywhere else. Medical patches that show information directly on a moving joint. Soft grippers that sense depth without a rigid camera box. Wearables that flex without a battery penalty. The capability now exists at the paper level. The date when it becomes manufacturable has moved much closer. All right, let's close this out. Today had a very specific feel. The old containers are starting to fail at holding the new capability. Private term sheets cannot contain the economics forever. City permitting cannot ignore water and power forever. National infrastructure cannot depend only on rented chips and closed systems forever. Even biology and electronics are pushing past the old containers. A cell identity, once treated like a one-way road, is being tested as something partly adjustable. Sensors and displays once built as hard surfaces are learning to move like soft ones. Now, there is friction in all of that. Public filings expose uncomfortable numbers. Moratoriums slow projects down. Sovereignty plans can carry state self-interest. Age reversal trials can overpromise. Lab devices can be years away from shelves. But the direction underneath today's news is generous. More people can see the books. More towns can demand the resource ledger. More countries can build part of the stack. More scientists can test claims against scored endpoints. More machines can meet the body where it is. That is what abundance looks like before it starts to be easy. It starts with pressure on the places that scarcity used to hide. A future built this way is less like a locked tower and more like public scaffolding, messy, visible, and argued over, still under construction, but being built. And the important part is who can build it and who can climb it. It reaches beyond the lab, beyond the investor, beyond the company with the biggest power contract. A wider circle is getting a foothold. That is the promise. And that is why building this future really means something. We'll see you tomorrow.